Hello and welcome to the webinar. We are ready to begin our program, so let's get started. I would like to introduce your host and presenter for today's event, Dave Kyle.
Hello, how's everybody doing today? Welcome to the webinar. Our program today is going to be client data. Do you have the right answers? And introduce presenters. My name is Dave Kyle. I'm the co-founder of Ease Technologies, and joining me today is from Chicago is Jim Meyer. Hey Jim, how you doing today?
Dave, I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Great. Jim is the managing director at Coordinated Response out of here in the East Coast. He's traveling today, and we're working together on making the presentation happen. Jim, do you want to tell us a little bit about your organization?
Well, sure. I think it's on the slide after next.
Yeah, I think I'll just jump over ahead here. So just again, real quick, Ease Technologies. I know many of you know who we are. We provide IT support services in the Baltimore, Washington, Northern Virginia area. I know we have a few customers on the line, as well as some folks we've been talking to for a while. So I'll introduce our services at the end, but just wanted to let you know who we are and where we're at. Jim, your turn.
Thanks, Dave. Coordinated Response was founded in 2012, and our whole purpose is to help clients develop a coordinated response to cyber threats. We do this by providing security assessments, and then we identify gaps and identify the improvements to fill those gaps. I've known Dave since 2012 as well. We've worked together in the Howard County Tech Council, but our reach is much broader than Howard County, and we look forward to talking to you today.
Great, thanks a lot, Jim. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Throw our agenda up here today. So in talking with a couple of our customers, some questions came up that they were running into as to how do they answer the challenging questions they felt they were running into to speak with their clients as well as vendors about how they deal with security, client data, and things like that. We take care of those challenges for them, but how do you respond to them accordingly? And they can be kind of difficult, and it's really a moving landscape out there. As a result of that, as Jim mentioned, we've known each other for a while, and talked to Jim about this particular topic, and felt it'd be a good fit for us to get together with you here and talk about some approaches you may have. We're not going to be able to answer everything for you, but we're certainly hopefully get you in the right direction, help you start on some things if you haven't begun already. But if you are already underway with trying to improve your plans and your security, just some ideas to continue to enhance what you're doing already. So a few things we want to talk about today for you. That would include some steps for your compliance, some thoughts and ideas about employee training, different aspects of security audits. What does that mean? What choices you may have? And then getting to looking at updating some of your policies. And throughout the whole conversation, we'll be throwing some tech talk in here. And if we do hit up with something that you feel is a little bit over your head or doesn't make sense, by all means, hit us in the Q&A there, and we'll try to bring it to a more a version of something that you understand or are working with. We're not trying to get too technical. It's probably more at a higher level anyway, our intentions today. So Jim, anything else you want to add to our agenda to make sure we're covering for everybody?
Nope, that's good.
Okay, great. So let's just first start off with some of the compliance areas. And I think this is a good one. I've done some webinars, and I think, Jim, you've spoken about this before as well. Compliance areas are kind of driving a lot of what we are trying to obtain to today. There's a lot of good news in this area. There's some challenges in this area. One of the older ones we've always dealt with is HIPAA, and that's been around for almost, I think, 18 or 19 years at least now. Doesn't that sound about right, Jim?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and then, so that's one we all deal with, and there's certain frameworks in that about how we deal with data, protecting that data, what type of data we're dealing with, and it's a good example of what compliance is and what we're going to be running into going forward. A lot of accounting or financial organizations deal with IRS, of course, and one of the newer ones that has come out is GDPR. And did a webinar with this last year, and it's a good one to understand, not necessarily to deal with right now, but to understand that this is a European data privacy set of regulations that came out and when it enacted in 2018. And basically it sets out the guidelines and laws that the European Union established to how to handle data protect that data, and what to do if there was a breach or a situation that occurred. And that's just sort of the basic essence of it all. We don't have that at a federal level in the United States just yet. We have a lot of things like HIPAA, IRS, or even the FTC that regulates some of this. But we're finding also too is that we have newer ones coming from state areas as well. And one of the first and more pronounced one is the California Consumer Privacy Act. And Jim, have you come across that one much yet?
A little bit, yes. They had an earlier version that came out about a half a dozen years ago. Some companies have already started aligning with that. And I think a key thing that Dave's talking about too, we ought to say, with the first one, HIPAA, we're dealing with personal health information, or PHI. The other four generally deal with personally identifiable information, birth date, social security number, and so on. And these are all good things to think about. By the way, the HIPAA evolved to the High Trust Alliance, which basically has the regulatory framework underlying HIPAA. And interestingly enough, one of our colleagues from the Howard Tech Council is now the Chief Information Security Officer for the High Trust Alliance, representing both the federal agencies as well as all of the healthcare industry. So we have good connections there if someone is interested in HIPAA and High Trust.
Yeah, and thanks. That's good news. I did not realize that. The things I wanted to share in this space about this compliance area is that you may not feel you're obligated to follow some of these. You may not feel you're obligated to follow things with how the EU is handling stuff, or you're not even doing business in California. Some of these organizations, though, institutions are claiming broader responsibility for the data that you're handling and not even realizing some of these things. So, whether you intend to sell into into the EU, or you have clients in California, knowing, and we're going to get to some of this, knowing your clients or your data, what you're handling, is a really important part to understand whether you're involved in these regulations or not. But I think my general comment about these compliance areas and regulations are it's good to understand them, because I think this is where even our own federal government and other states will be going here shortly is, you need to be good stewards of the data you have, and taking a proactive approach to this situation. And that's what we want to uncover for you today. So. So just for example, even in Maryland, which I know we have a lot of customers and folks we work with in this state, this is a good example of what we're involved with today. And if you look over what I have here, this is just one Maryland code, 143501, okay, 3503. It's really a pretty vague set of laws that it really is about intent. Okay, it's really a company or a business, an organization must implement and maintain reasonable security procedures. And that's probably about the extent of what they're asking for or looking at from anybody. And that's still today kind of what all these intend to do. Future regulations be very, very specific for us and how we, protect, maintain, communicate, and be transparent with the data that we are working with. So that's probably the mildest thing we're ever going to see going forward is how Maryland approaches it today. There's still obligations by Maryland, but it's also other regulatory areas, as I mentioned, that will be, you need to comply with. And I think, we're going to see, as I mentioned, a lot of other places stepping up to more stringent data management. And I think getting ahead of it is probably your best bet for everyone, which is why you're on the webinar today.
And Dave, one other observation, the notion of compliance in the state of Maryland, you need to show intent.
Yeah.
You need to take the first steps. And in most security models, there's a discussion of maturity. So, as we go through this presentation, getting started, you're new to it. But then next year, you get a little better at it. And that's the notion, have intent and continue to improve.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest message that I would share with anybody we work with is, what are you doing today? What steps are you taking to improve? And like Jim said, the word there is intent. Are you trying to do a better job at what you have today? Not every organization is going to be at equal footing, but are you trying to do some things? Are you taking action? And that's what we want to share with you is, what actions can you be taking if you haven't started any already? So policies are going to be a big one. Audit, inspections, planning, training, documentation, and ongoing updates. And Jim, do you want to elaborate on some of this? Because these six are probably the core fundamentals, and not just for compliance, but any aspect of your organization and what you need to be thinking about today, and writing this down as to, okay, we need to take action in all six of these areas.
Well, yeah, it's that notion is the policies are the umbrella. Once we have them, we want to look at, see how we're doing things with audit and inspections. We find gaps and we build a plan. And part of that plan includes training, right? Getting the employees, because the employees, we all are. We're the weakest link. We make a mistake, we click on a bad link. Obviously, documentation, documenting the processes, documenting the standards, documenting the results of the training, and then ongoing review and updates.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that documentation part with you. The documentation is not just updating your policies. The documentation is, you creating, information sets that you're holding on to about what steps are you taking. And this is probably, as much as anything else, really important if you ever do get into a bind or a problem does occur. You can pull out this information to show that and demonstrate that, we have been doing things over the last 3 years. We've taken steps. Here's our plan, but here's what we've done to enact on the plan as well. So, you can really prove to someone at this point that, gee, there's a bad thing that happened, but, our intent was that we've been working hard to improve our situation and we've taken steps, and let me prove it to you kind of scenario. And I think there's a lot that to be said in most organizations, or when they are in a bind, this is the kind of stuff that helps mitigate that particular evaluation of that situation by making sure that you've documented what you're doing and share it along with other people too. I mean, we also, any part of your business, if you're a business owner, you're looking at, what are your healthcare plans, what's your insurance, all these things, and sometimes these things are only visited once a year. And we only visit our health care insurance once a year. But when we're doing that, we take notes and make plans throughout the year. So that when it comes down again to making those decisions, we can review our notes, look at our plans, and then kind of go forward. And I really recommend the documentation part of that. It's really something that's important that you follow through with. All right, just jump into a few of these. So data, and Jim, I'm going to pass this over to you because I know you've had a lot of work in this area. And this
Sure. Well, and first question is, what do you think the most sensitive data is that you're managing in your network? And is it personal identity information from human resources, or is it client data? Do you work for clients where you might be handling their intellectual property or their sensitive financial information? And so you want to kind of group and classify your data. And if one part of your practice area has very sensitive client data, intellectual property, even their personally identifiable information, you may want to separate that part of the practice off from another part that's dealing with less sensitive information. And that could be, it doesn't matter if you're in law or accounting, or as long as, I have sensitive customer information because I do security assessments of how the customer is protecting your data, and I need to protect that. So data classification comes first, and then how do you handle it? So maybe that left-hand side where there's some very sensitive data, you want to secure it on a server, limit the access, and maybe encrypt it. The less sensitive data might be on a more general purpose server, handled with a little less binding controls. That includes data access. Who needs to see the data? And disclosure of personal information use. Occasionally you have to tell your client, here's how I'm dealing with it, and they need to know it's protected. And at the end of the day, you want to get rid of any data you don't need to keep, whether it's sensitive or not sensitive. You want to have as part of your data classification policy, you want to have a data destruction mechanism in place. And by the way, that's something that ease can help with in terms of cleaning disks, getting rid of stuff.
Yeah, there's a whole process for that, and that's part of the technical parts of the things. Is how does data destruction happen? And like any good organization, we're going to follow some best practices there about how we wipe hard drives, things like that. And that's the kind of stuff where we can jump in and help someone out, because and it happens all the time. We decommission a server, we're decommissioning computers. And there is a process to that, and that's hopefully where an organization like Ease or someone else you're working with is going to help you complete that kind of data destruction process from a technical side. All this too also applies to analog. Your paper records also fall into all this too. So every time we say something digitally, I would also, think about it. What kind of paper records do you have? What's your destruction? Are you using something like Iron Mountain? How often are they coming by? What's your policy of retention? Things like that we'll get into a little bit. I think the first one I want to kind of emphasize that I think is really important and probably the most daunting for everyone is the data classification. And if you were going to talk to a law firm, you're going to talk to a nonprofit, you're going to talk to a number of organizations. If you say, hey, we need to talk to you about data classification, I think the first thing to do is they're going to, skin's going to, or their hair's going to crawl at the top of their skin and go, oh my gosh, I don't even know what that means. And I think that that's really an important one to kind of go after for so many reasons, because it's the one that you really need to sit down and go, what do we have? Where do we have it? And what are we really talking about? And that's a hard one, especially when you're not really involved with, managing it prior to this, because normally you're just doing your job and you're taking care of customers, or you're, taking care of the job that you have today. But really sitting down and taking a good hard look. And this was where, again, someone like maybe Jim's company can come in and help you out, is to really analyze what is your data and ask some of the harder questions, because some of that stuff is you just don't realize you have data in these areas, or you're keeping track of a marketing database over somewhere else, or you have client data that's kept in this particular area by one person and you forgot all about it. You just assume that Bill does it in such a way and he's got it covered. Well, those are the hard questions that need to be asked and evaluated, and depending on the organization, bringing the right people together to say, let's sit down and kind of evaluate all we have, and not necessarily do like Jim's suggesting, take care of everything all at one time, but at least let's start with knowing what you got. Where is it at? Kind of scenario like that. And then the part that is really important is updating policies. I think most organizations have a difficult time knowing what you have and then updating policies. And we've been working really hard with organizations about this and working with them to help implement what we have as our own policies for our clients. And some of this is the technical aspect of this, as this list demonstrates, with things like authentication. What's the policy? Is it multi-factor authentication? What's the acceptable use policies of passwords? What is the things around here to keep you protected? Do you have policies in place about activity monitoring? All those kind of areas of restrictions on who can have access to certain kinds of information. What are the things that you typically run into, Jim?
Well, clearly we want to work with clients to say, how can we limit your risk of going to a bad website? There are a lot of websites you don't need to access from the business network.
Right.
But there are some that you do. And some of those may still be social media. If you're doing a background check on an employee and you're part of HR, you need to be able to go to Facebook and other social media. But does that mean that should generally be available? So you need to think about that. And if you do have those restrictions, they need to be in the acceptable use policy so your employees are aware of it.
Right.
Also, that you need to talk about if you're going to monitor. Most of you may not realize it, but the system will automatically log access to outside networks. You need to let employees know if they go to an outside network, it's going to be logged, and you have the responsibility and the authority to go look through those logs for any inappropriate access.
Yeah, and that also, there's a whole bunch of little ones out there too. We have everything from policy of if something, if a computer gets compromised, or if a computer gets lost, and even a smartphone gets lost, it's part of the policy and process of the employee to notify employers as to what's going on. And this part of this policy and education process makes a big difference in mitigating breaches. And so there's a lot of little things in here that you kind of go, oh, I just assumed someone would tell me. If someone loses their iPhone on a Thursday and doesn't tell you on Monday, you've got 4 days of, what potentially expose risk to yourself, things like that as a business. And, any number of hundreds of thousands of laptops are lost at airports and all kinds of situations. And they become it's a exposed risk for everybody, and that's kind of any number of little things in these policies can really help prevent and mitigate what could potentially happen. Again, a lot of times we're looking at, again, as Jim described, in our role, we're trying to reduce your surface that you're exposed to, and we're going to do as much as we can technically, but these other things are really critical as well. So we're going to look at all aspects of your policies, social media, responsibilities of employees, password management, password resetting, things along those lines. So it's communicated and the expectations are met by everybody on the team. Security audits. This is a big one, and I think more and more so, I remember first time people were asking for some of these things 10 years ago, and it was like, no one had a real good idea of what we were trying to even assess in some ways in some of these audits. Today, even for small businesses, audits are a big deal, very important, but also it's more clearly defined as what needs to be evaluated. And Jim, this is one of your expertise areas.
Sure. Well, and it's interesting. Some of the federal oversight, especially in the financial community, will pick an area, and that's going to be the area they examine over the course of the 12 months. And they're very clear about it. So they might say, we're going to look at your risk management process and also the risk assessment that you do. Later, they might say, we're going to be looking at software and hardware inventories to see if you keep and maintain those. One of the things you want to make sure is there's nothing on your network that you don't know about. And your service provider can help, but you can also set it up so it blocks, adding a wireless connection point just for somebody's convenience. So asset management is important, risk management is important, protecting those assets. And all of this, by the way, is part of the cybersecurity framework developed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Identify your assets and make sure your employees are aware of how to protect them. What do you do for risk management? How do you protect your assets? What kind of monitoring do you do? And if you see a problem, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, how do you address that incident? How do you respond and how do you recover?
Got it. Planning's a big one. We've mentioned this already, and this is something that we have a list of 6 items on here for you. They're not necessarily the same 6 items between every company. I mean, your plan this year is going to be different for your plan next year, and Jim was alluding to some of that too, where you get evaluated on different things by different years. Your plan should look differently every year as well. So what you start and what you need to do today, it may just be your plan is to have an audit this year. But there are things that from a technical standpoint, our organization want to evaluate, and there's other things that Jim's going to do in an audit, and out of those things, you should be combining them into your own plan and making sure that you're following through with some of those. So we have a few things listed on there. We have some real fundamentals we always work with. If you're going to work with us or probably any other managed service provider, you're thinking about, we're making sure that our plans are including regular software updates, anti-malware, software protection for you. And some of these are kind of older, but we don't assume anything. More and more we're making sure data is encrypted. So your hard drives are encrypted, your communication between sites is encrypted, and your mobile devices are encrypted. So these are a little bit newer, but may not be conscious of doing some of these things, but these are things that we're evaluating. And one we're really working hard with lately is the multi-factor authentication for organizations. And this is the concept where, if you're not familiar with the term, it's if you've been to your bank online or a financial institution of some type, they're going to want to send you a text message with a number associated. So it's you have your name and you have your password, and you have this other authentication process, something from your phone or some other device that gives you access to the data that you need to get to. So we're really, it's not new, it's been around for a while, but most small, medium-sized businesses were not enacting this. This is kind of a larger enterprise or a government-related kind of process. But we're making sure that this is delivered to all businesses, whether you're 1,000 users or 5 users, you're getting multi-factor authentication to almost all aspects of your mail and other areas where you're most vulnerable. Jim, do you want to elaborate on plan areas, things like that?
Sure. Dave earlier mentioned the attack surface, the area that can be attacked. And it's like software updates. If there's software you don't need or don't use, don't have it on your devices. Limit the software, whether it's applications from Microsoft Office, to only those that you really need. That way you don't have to worry about as many updates, and you don't need to worry about as much malware protection. Limit your attack surface. Network is a great example. Question number one, who needs access to your network? If it's only your employees when they're working in the office, it's pretty easy to nail down and protect that network. But let's say you go to the cloud, you might need some extra protection, and multi-factor authentication might be that extra protection. Do your clients or do your vendors need to be able to log into your network? Now you're expanding your attack surface, and you need a few more protections. They should definitely have to use multi-factor authentication to come into the network. And you might restrict the time of day they can do that. Maybe it's during normal business hours, so that someone's not coming in at night and you're not monitoring them as well. So Dave talked about attack surface, and that's an example. And when you look at any of these, network protections is that great example. Who needs access, and how do you secure that?
Mm-hmm. Here's another one. Another tip for you is, what's your plan for once an employee leaves? Okay, that's a big one we try to work with, and we only are able to execute on an employee's termination or leaving of an organization when we know about it, and sometimes we do it ourselves, which is okay. Let's just run through everything in our system and make sure we have everybody in there who's supposed to be in there. And it's something that works well for both parties. You don't want to leave somebody's name in there into your system for months on end. You should really have a plan around, okay, Bill left. How long do you keep it? How long do you, and how often do you follow up into your systems, whether they be applications or databases or shared information that, something like Dropbox, do you just leave it running there? And oh my gosh, Tim's name is still attached to that, and Tim left there, 6 years ago. That's not the kind of stuff you want to have. So having a plan about former employees and retaining and having access to that data is really critical too. This is another expertise area that you have, Jim, and I'm going to let you run with this one.
Well, annual training should address company policies, just to remind people what the acceptable use is, how data is classified and protected, and if there are specifics compliance, if you've got regulations or laws that you are obliged to comply with, make sure that employees know that as well. That's the higher level. Awareness training is more about what kind of mistakes you can make when you're interacting with the computer, whether you don't want to click on a bad link that might infect your computer or take you to a bad website. And yes, that's phishing awareness, but there's other awareness as well. Awareness about what the physical security restrictions are and how to be careful that someone doesn't, follow you through the door. If they do, ask who they're here to see, make sure you challenge them. So awareness training is broader. Phishing awareness is part of that. And one of the things we recommend with the phishing awareness is to conduct phishing tests, where you actually literally send email to a targeted set of your employees and even contractors, and see if they click on a bad link. And I have a terrible story to tell about a very large defense contractor who did a phishing test, sent out an email to about 1,000 employees. And unfortunately, about 5% clicked on a bad link. That's a lot, right? Good news is about a third of them reported the email as being suspicious. The other remainders didn't click, but didn't report it. And you'd almost want to see a higher reporting to make sure people are saying, hey, this shouldn't be coming through. And you also want to do that training. You don't want to go after the employees that click. You want to give them some additional training to help them avoid the mistake next time.
Yeah, we all click on the links. I have to admit, I remember 8 months ago or so, I clicked on a link, and it was one of those moments of, I can't believe I just did that. I got fooled. We get fooled on these things. Okay.
I took an online phishing test. There were 10 emails, and I got 9 out of 10 right, but the one I got wrong would have put me in jeopardy.
Right.
I know what I'm looking for. So this is something that's worth recurring training, and I do that for myself on a regular basis.
So, I do webinars, provide webinars probably at least 6 times a year, if not more. And one of the ones I provided for everybody and for our clients particularly was a identifying phishing emails program for about 20, it was about 25-minute webinar. And just yesterday, one of the guys from the help desk came over and said, hey, do we have anything we can help one of our clients provide this kind of education to our their new employees on this? So we have these kind of things, and you should be able to identify and look at some of these things. Again, trying to do something and putting a plan in place and acting on it is really important. And this would be one of those areas that, on your plan list should be some sort of training on a couple different levels. And again, you may not be able to do phishing tests today, but you can certainly add to company policies, training on those policies, and having some phishing awareness programs for yourself pretty easily. So if you suspect a breach, and this is an important one too, I mean, it's much as anything else, there's a good chance you're going to encounter a situation where you need to react to something. And there's a couple different areas and spaces we want to get to. And, I typically talk about 4 different areas, one of which, or 2, actually all of them should be things you should know about ahead of time. The technical one is if you have a breach, you need to reach out to your technical resources or if you even suspect the breach, call on them to be brought in to figure out, what is it that I see? Is it what I think it is? Am I safe? What do I need to do kind of scenario? So the technical one is the first and foremost, a critical one you need to have access to. Without understanding that answer for yourself, you're really just uncertain as to what's going on, and the other solutions, other people you want to be bringing into the picture are going to want to ask the same question. Are you certain that you have a problem? Do you know what the problem is, and how who got affected by something like this? Jim, your conversations with an organization on this area?
Well, interestingly enough, we did a formal incident response plan for a multinational law firm, and it was driven by one of their major clients basically saying, hey, you've got my sensitive data. How do you protect it? And if it does get breached, how do you respond? And, if you're large and multinational, that could be a couple month long effort. But if you're small, single branch or multiple, 2 office environment, sit down with the key players, the chief legal counsel for your firm, either inside or outside, your marketing communication, and just have a talking session. What would we do if? And start making notes. It turns into a checklist and a contact list.
Yeah.
Contact for this, who do I contact for that? And all of a sudden you have a response plan that will help you if the alarm bell goes off.
Yeah, it's really hard to, put a full plan in place if something you don't know what's going to happen, but it's more important to know who your resources are if something were to. And that's kind of what our message here in this is, who do you need to reach out to and get involved with you? Certainly, the insurance component of this is you would have to have the insurance prior to the event. I can assure you that no insurance company is going to want to engage with you if you've already had an event. But know to who the business insurance agents are, or know who a public relations person might be who can support you in a situation that you need to deal with. And again, your type of data that you have may be in a smaller amount, but also you may be a marketing company that has tens or hundreds of thousands of information of somebody else's data. And that may be the real critical component of this, is that were to be compromised, how would you make that better for all those customers and all those individuals that are involved in this situation? And let's just talk about insurance just real briefly. That landscape has evolved tremendously over the last, I'd say, 10 years. I remember the first time someone talked to us about, hey, they need to have insurance for this. And it's like, wow, is that even out there now? And certainly enough, it's expanded greatly. My biggest message for insurance is understanding the different types of insurance. It's like your car insurance. It's like your home insurance. It's your business insurance, employee insurance. There's different types for different situations based on your business. Everything from data privacy to notification. You can have insurance that would help support you if you held a lot of names and addresses, and that's what some of these situations are. If you remember some of the larger ones where you got a letter in the mail, they may have had insurance that covered that expense for things even like not only notifications but credit monitoring too. Crisis management is that PR. They may have an insurance product that allows you to engage and pay for a crisis management team to come in. You may have to have some insurance that has to bring in somebody like Jim's organization who could pay for that part of the component to invest and deal with incidents that occur. Certainly, you have things like data privacy regulation. Cyber extortion is another one that is insurance is available for something like that. Again, it depends on the organization and talking to a good insurance broker to find out, what's your business, what are your needs, and really where do you want to mitigate your risk if something were to happen. One of the things I want to offer to everybody, and I've shared this in the past with a lot of the tax prep organizations we support, but even if you're a law firm, nonprofit, financial organization, another professional group, this particular document from the IRS is one of the best that's out there. So if you're looking for some general ideas about how to move forward, as Jim and I discussed with you, this IRS publication, and you can just Google it, IRS publication 4557, and I think the last date on it was from about a year ago, and you'll see a date on it, but it provides a really good overview of about 17 pages that talks about the same things we're discussing with you today. Assess your risk, understand the impact, create a plan, test, monitor, and revise is the overall message in there, which is a lot of what Jim and I have been sharing with you today. But you can download that, and it's not just for tax purposes, it's for any business that wants to really improve, protect client data of whatever type it may be. Jim, do you have any other final suggestions for anybody else?
Well, I think it's worth noting that there are a lot of different frameworks, and they all have enough similarities that if you choose one, it'll allow you to show intent and to mature your processes. So starting with the IRS is a good example. If you're in healthcare, you might have to look at the high trust, which is much more complicated, but they all have the same things we were talking about: access control, protecting data, classifying it. So any of these appropriate to your organization will help you advance the ball.
Yeah, and I think the message, as we discussed earlier, is that's the big thing: advancing the ball, starting with something, putting and acting on a few areas, and continuing to shore up and improve upon what you have today, so you can demonstrate that you've taken action towards something. Because taking no action is probably not going to work out well for you if you do have a problem somewhere along the way. I do have one question that came in. It's a question that comes in kind of often, and I'm not going to read it word for word, but I'm going to read off a general one because it's kind of what we've seen before. We have someone who works at the front desk. Is it okay for that person to actively engage on social media and go wherever they want to go on the internet? We're really concerned about what they do and where they go. My answer to that is you generally need to set a policy for everybody how they want to engage with it. If you have a particular person that you're very concerned about, maybe you let them have an iPad or some other device that's for personal use and let them do what they want to do up there in that way. But you're separating them from the key business information if that's what they also do too. So if they are also involved with, helping support payroll, for example, and they're not somebody you feel really good about, knowing how to handle some of this, they've gotten in trouble in the past, maybe you're providing them a different means of doing it. But generally, separating the stuff they need to keep safe and the stuff they're doing maybe in an unsafe manner is one of your routes to take. But it's also your choice to say, hey, look, as a policy, we're going to lock this down, and no one can do these kind of things. So it's really up to you. But if they've demonstrated a lack of responsibility, you need to mitigate that for yourself in some way. Is what my answer would be. But ultimately, it's going to decide to you as to that person, educated enough to deal with it, or it's just going to continue to happen and you need to stop it in some way. That's all the questions we have for today. I just want to wrap things up. If you have any more questions, by all means, send me an email. I want to just wrap things up on my side with, again, introducing Ease Technologies. We do have an Ease Cloud workspace that's a great turnkey solution that provides increased security for many, if not all, the things we've been talking about. We have a great system for disaster recovery. It provides you to allow you to work from anywhere. It works on any device and helps you accomplish and meet many of the compliance requirements that we talked about today. So if you're interested in learning more about how a cloud solution that we may have that could support you and make your life provide better peace of mind, contact me if you'd like to, or get a hold of us here at Ease Tech. And this webinar is being recorded. We'll share it with other folks. And Jim, I want to thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate
any closing thoughts or anything else for us today?
No, just that I appreciate working with you, Dave, and this is what we need to do to advance the interests of our clients and the protection of cybersecurity.
Great. Thank you, everybody else, for joining us today, and hopefully we'll catch you in the next one. Have a great day.